Now, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran of service in Iraq and Afghanistan, still in the Air Force Reserves, where he's a major. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us. I want to get to the hack. I want to get to all that in a moment. But let's talk about what Russia's doing, not only in Syria now, but in Iraq, apparently trying to expand its influence there, getting ready to launch airstrikes in Iraq against ISIS targets there. And I think the regime there of the Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, getting ready to accept that. How upset should the U.S. be after all the blood and treasure the U.S. invested in Iraq if Russia now is going to emerge as a serious player there?
Well, we should be angry. I mean, if you think about it, the Russians haven't had a role in the Middle East in decades. And Vladimir Putin has seen this as his opportunity to re-engage Russia in Middle Eastern politics. And I know there's a fatigue that's setting in, and people sometimes like to default to saying, well, let's just get out of the Middle East. The reality is the Middle East is a very important part of the world with a lot of resources, a lot of people, and America writing the rules of the Middle East in conjunction with our partners is way better than the Russians doing it. You see the Russians prop up an evil guy like Bashar al-Assad who kills 250,000 people, and there's an unholy alliance developing between Russia, Iran, and Syria right now. And my guess is if Russia moves into Iraq, which it seems like they probably will, this will also be to prop up the Iranians in Iraq.
Did you ever think when you were serving in Iraq and you saw your fellow military personnel dying, coming home badly injured, that a few years later Russia would be moving in, and Iran, neighboring to Iraq, has a lot of influence in Baghdad right now? It seems to be growing.
You know, when I left in 2009, I left in May of 2009, and the situation was relatively stable. We had basically defeated the opposition. It was kind of just maintaining things at this point. When I left, I thought to myself, if we leave this, if we pull all the troops out, it's going to fall apart. But I never would have imagined, you know, that was laying my head eventually would be occupied by ISIS.
Where was that?
That was in Balad Air Base.
At the U.S. Air Base in Balad.
That's right. And I never assumed that the Russians would have a role to play. But look, this is where the Russian economy is basically the size of Italy. And they've now said that they're going to re-engage as a great power in the world. This should have huge implications for us because the Russians are not doing this for humanitarian reasons. They're doing this to rewrite the global rules.
I'm sure you never thought that Iran and Russia would have significant influence in Iraq, and that ISIS would be in control of big cities like Mosul, city of some 2 million people, the second largest city in Iraq.
And I did a lot of time in Mosul, by the way, and it's sad to hear.
I was in Mosul in 2005. I was in Balad at that time, and things were looking pretty positive, but obviously things changed very quickly. Let's talk a little bit about Russia's influence. Did Russia's military moves in Crimea and Ukraine embolden President Putin to do these steps in Syria and now Iraq?
I think so. And let's go further back. Georgia. I mean, a good part of Georgia is still occupied by Russia. Russia has taken moves to annex south of Abkhazia, and then they move into Ukraine. They annex Crimea. There's still a war in eastern Ukraine that we don't hear much about. You do a great job of covering it, but not a ton of people talk about it. And then he moves into the Middle East, and at each step, he's met by the U.S. feigning anger about it, and then ending up joining alliances, for instance, in Syria to figure out how we keep our planes from crashing into each other. Here's how you keep the planes from crashing into each other. You tell Putin to quit flying because he's not welcome there. But unfortunately, that's not what's coming from this administration.
I don't know if he would listen at this point.
I don't know. That might be too late.
Congressman, stand by. We have more to discuss, much more on the breaking news right after this. What if they decide they're not going to support Paul Ryan? What happens next?
Well, I hope that's not the decision. You know, they have an 80% threshold, but I think, you know, sometimes they say that somebody has to agree with them 100%, not 80%. Look, if they don't, then it's going to be interesting. I mean, if Paul can still get to, you know, can peel off some of those, great. If not, it's uncharted territory. Boehner has said he is going to stay until that's done, until we have a new speaker. So he may be in past the end of October, or there's going to be other names floated and the potential of a coalition speaker. But at the end of the day, I hope they go with Paul Ryan. He's a good conservative. He works across the aisle, and he'd be a fantastic speaker, not just for our party. That's important, but for the country.
If they decide to not go ahead and support Paul Ryan, he might still be able to get 218 Republicans. That's the number you need But I take it he doesn't want to do that unless he gets almost all Republicans to vote in favor of his speakership.
Yeah, look, Paul Ryan is a reluctant warrior, but he's a good warrior. He's in the job he's loved. He's the chairman of Ways and Means. He likes writing tax policy. But he recognizes that, this is a moment where he's called possibly to do bigger things. But he doesn't want to be a speaker that comes to the speakership with a proverbial gun pointed to his head, with a constant threat of deposing him, a constant threat of do 100% what 30 people want, or else you're going to be gone. He wants to be liberated to lead our conservative principles to the American people, and I think he'd do a great job of it. And I'm going to tell you, the Republicans last night at that conference were unified behind him, and I hope that all of us can be unified and he can be speaker.
Not necessarily all the members of the Freedom Caucus were unified, and there were 30 or 40 of them, right?
Right, but there's 247 Republicans in the House, and I sure hope that those 30 or 40 do the right thing and say, let's move together with our bold conservative ideas and take them to the American people.
Have you spoken to these representatives from the Freedom Caucus?
I've spoken to some. They're keeping their vests, pretty close to their cards pretty close to their chest. I hope Dana can report that they've decided to endorse Paul Ryan, and we move forward with him as a great speaker.
We'll see what happens. It's obviously a very sensitive moment right now in the U.S. House of Representatives. Who's going to be the next speaker? Second in line to the presidency.
That's right.
Let's not forget
That's right.
that. Congressman, thanks very much for coming in.
You bet.
Adam
Thanks.
Kinzinger of Illinois.